Hey guys, I'm Dave and welcome to the Trull Gallery. Today we're going to talk about clamps. There are lots of great clamps out there on the market today, and sometimes for a new woodworker it's tough to figure out which ones you should buy first, or maybe which ones you should buy at all. I want to go through some of the clamps that you see behind me, and maybe a few you can't, talk about their pros and cons, and maybe give you an idea of where you can start collecting your clamps. But always know, regardless of how many clamps you have, you're always going to be a couple clamps shy for your next job. Let's start with an old standby. Their actual name escapes me, but I'll look it up and tag it here in a minute. And while this particular clamp is about as tiny as I've ever seen, I do have its big brother. The nice thing about these guys is that you don't have to always clamp things that are parallel. By offsetting the threads, you can clamp angled material, whether it's one side or the other. And just know that my back thread here is bent, so it's a little wonky. But these are great for clamping angled materials. These are also great when you're working on, say, larger panels that you want to stand on edge to work on. And you can't figure out how to clamp them down. I'll clamp my panel with these guys, and then clamp this to my bench, and then holds things securely. Kind of moving forward in technology, I guess, are pipe clamps. Pipe clamps are great because they're relatively inexpensive, and you can get them in most any length. Generally, you'll find these in half-inch pipe and three-quarter-inch pipe. I have always gone with the three-quarter-inch pipe, and I've got several of these. There's, I don't know, 6 here on the wall and probably another 8 or 10 in my shed. Basically, you'll buy the clamping mechanism and then buy some pipe to go with it. Now, these will work with black pipe like I have here, or kind of that galvanized pipe. One of the things to watch out for is that both are very likely to stain your wood while you're gluing up, which is why you'll see most of my clamps have some remnants of tape on their face, and the tape prevents the glue and the black pipe or the galvanized pipe from reacting together, which prevents that black scarring. One of the things that I add on to my clamps are these little pads. These little pads. Now, these particular clamps are from Pony Jorgensen, and they also make the pads that go with them. And this just prevents those metal faces from marring your surface. Again, one of the nice things about these clamps is you can pretty much get pipes as long as 10 feet, which is great if you're doing a big project. But most of the time, our projects aren't that large. And if you get a piece of pipe that's 10 feet long, it's threaded on both ends, you can cut it in half, have two 5-foot clamps. And again, all of my clamps here on the wall are 5-footers. In my shed, I've got several different sizes that I've cut down. I've got as small as, I think, 2, maybe 3 foot. So you get to use the clamp, get the power of these clamps, but you don't always need the length. And one other thing I want to show you is something I stumbled upon, a year or so ago when I had a large project. I needed clamps that were well over 5 feet. And I found these couplers at the big box store, and it's just a couple of set screws, and you can set these. So one set screw is on a pipe, and then bring in another pipe on the other end, and now you can have, again, a 10-foot. Now, I don't want to keep a 10-foot pipe around because I don't use it very often. But these couplers that I may have spent a couple bucks for allow me to clamp 2 pieces of pipe together and extend the length of my clamp. The next clamp that most of us have seen, and that's called an F-style clamp, or is it for you? That would be the F-style. And again, there are a lot of versions of this. Thicker bars, thinner bars. If you kind of compare These two bars here, you can see as the clamps get smaller, they tend to get a smaller bar, but not always. You can get a small clamp with a wide bar. And these are fairly reasonably priced. And again, the smaller your clamp, the less expensive it is, but you're also limiting yourself in depth. So I have, I think, 3 sizes of S-style clamps that I keep handy: 18, 24, and 36 inches. That kind of lets me work in most of the ranges of the furniture I build. And it's pretty easy to see how they operate. There's serrations on the top and bottom of the bar, and the head moves freely, and then once you get some angle and some pressure to it, they'll catch. So you can clamp down. I used to be a clamp snob. I'm only going to buy name brands because those are the only ones that are any good. This particular one happens to be a Bessie, and in case you're wondering, most of my clamps are over 20 years old. So if they're looking a little worn and beat up, they've been around the shop a while. But as I was saying, this particular was a Bessie. They make great clamps, and I was never going to buy the cheap clamps that are out there. But guess what? In the last few years, inexpensive clamps have become just as nice as some of the more expensive versions that are out there. I always think of Harbor Freight as like, I'm going to go there to buy that one tool that I will use one time and never use it again. And if it breaks, I'm okay with that. But they're up in their game. And I've heard a lot of talk of how well their clamps work. And I said, well, let's give it a shot. And I bought these probably 2 years ago. And these clamps are holding up just as well as any of the others. They got great clamping pressure and they don't slip. You don't have to spend a lot of money on clamps. I encourage you to try out at least the F-style clamps at Harbor Freight and maybe some other others as well. The next clamp that I'll talk about are the quick grips. They slide back and forth pretty easily. There's usually a release mechanism, and then there's the locking mechanism. Again, there's a lot of versions of these, a lot of manufacturers. Mine happen to be Irwins. They're all Irwins. I happen to have 2 sizes of the Irwins and my wee little DeWalt ones that I use. And I used to make fun of my son who used these. But when you've got something tiny to clamp up, these little guys are great. Again, these will let you get into a lot of places where the larger clamps may not get to, but you're not going to get the same amount of clamping force. And while we're on the subject of clamping force, most clamp videos that I've seen talk about how many PSI you can get from this clamp versus that clamp, and this manufacturer versus that manufacturer. And I don't get it. You don't need a zillion foot-pounds of force to glue up something. If you need tons and tons of force to bring your joint together, your joint is too tight. You just need to get enough pressure to hold your materials together until that glue sets or you get the pins in or the fasteners in. You don't need to crank them down to hundreds of foot-pounds, in my humble opinion. I'm sure that will inspire a lot of comments, but that's okay. This is my opinion. This is my video, and I don't think you need to crank down so much. But while we're on the subject, if you look at the threads on your clamps, let's pull up this guy versus this guy. So the Bessie has fairly coarse thread, whereas the Harbor Freight, as an example, has a fairly fine thread. Not only is the coarse thread going to move your clamping heads faster, it will also allow you to put on a little more pressure. And the finer threads are just the opposite. It'll move slower and put on less pressure. Just the coarseness, and I think that's like an Acme thread or something like that, but the coarseness of that thread allows you to put a little extra pressure on there. But again, you don't need all that pressure. One more clamp to talk about is the parallel clamps. Again, these are now manufactured by pretty much everybody who makes clamps. And one of the things about these clamps is the faces aren't parallel until there's pressure on them. They're kicked out a little, so as pressure is applied, they come into parallel. Not a big deal, but if you're looking at, I've seen a lot of videos where they're like, oh, I brought my clamps together and they're not parallel. Well, if there's no pressure on them, they won't be. There's a couple of nice things about these. One is they, in fact, keep the stock parallel while it's being glued up. The thing that I like about them, and I use these for most of the time, is that because they have a wide clamping face, they're less likely to dent your material as you're clamping things up. When you compare this wide space to the contact points of one of these clamps, this is maybe a 3/4 inch diameter, whereas this is 3 inches or so. So by dispersing the pressure out, you're less likely to dent your materials. We got a couple more clamps I want to talk about. The first is spring clamps. Now I have several versions of these, and a lot of them just kind of accumulated. I've even got some of these tiny ones, which living in Florida are easy to come by. Anytime somebody gets their house tended for termites, the pest control guys leave these laying all around the place, which is how I think I got all of these. You can get them in metal bodies or the plastic bodies. This is the joy of working one-handed, guys. I'm sorry. And again, these are great for getting into those places or literally getting in and quickly popping something together. They have their challenges. Sometimes on this style, the jaws will get out of whack. Sometimes this style will provide so much pressure that it can dent the material. But if you just need to clamp something together real quick while you're putting in some fasteners, spring clamps are great for that. I also want to talk about C-clamps. Now, again, if you look at my C-clamp collection, there are lots of different styles. This was a 4-inch, which is like the opening that the max opening you can get on one of these guys. And again, there's a mix of threads, there's a mix of frame sizes, frame depth, width. But these are great for a lot of things in woodworking. And what I use them mostly for is when I'm gluing up a panel and I've got 2 boards and I want to make sure that they stay in plane, I can put the C-clamp on either end, put a little pressure on them, bring those boards in plane, and then tighten the joint up with whichever clamp I'm using behind me. There's a lot of uses for C-clamps. Again, they're smaller, you can get into different places. I've got a couple of these guys where the throat is much deeper, and you can kind of see here, it's almost twice the distance, so I can reach in farther. So these are great. Some of these are starting to show their age, where the bar is actually, this is supposed to be straight, not a 90-degree bend there. They're old. There's also a lot of specialty clamps out there, whether it's a corner clamp, and this is like for doing frames, it's a small corner clamp, but clamp manufacturers have a lot of different corner clamps out there that are available. You can clamp things up. There are clamps for putting edge banding on, for example. Specialty clamps are just that, for special needs. I may use these guys maybe once every couple of years. I've had them forever. I think they were given to me. When you need them, they're great, but you don't always need to buy them. Sometimes there's workarounds, and sometimes you can make your own. But some of the specialty clamps are really cool if you do a lot of the work that they're designed for on a regular basis. This is just a quick video to talk about some of the different clamps that are out there. And I'm sure I've missed some, but in the grand scheme of things, these are the clamps that I've used over the last 30 plus years. While they're not all that old, some of them are. There are enough good clamp manufacturers out there now that you don't necessarily have to buy one of the two brand names. I'm not sure I would rush out and buy the cheap online clamps, but in your local stores or even some of the local catalogs, there's plenty of clamping options to choose from, and everyone does something a little different. I probably started with just pipe clamps because back in the day, this was the most economical option. I think now that there are more people in the clamp business, you can get a lot of reasonably priced F-style or even quick grip clamps. And buying one or two at a time is a great way to build your collection. Again, what you see here is the majority of my clamps. Like I said, I've got some in storage, but I didn't buy these all at once. This was a collection over the years. Like I said, these F-styles from Harbor Freight are probably less than a year old, whereas some of my pipe clamps over here are 30 plus years old. I'd recommend you buy a few clamps at a time as you need them and in the style that is most beneficial at the moment. I use all of these clamps all the time, except for those weird corner clamps, but you get the idea. I use all of them because they each do something a little different. They have more reach, they're easier to use, they have less reach, they apply a lot of pressure, they apply just enough pressure. I can get into tight places, I can get into large panels. Mix and match your clamps. Don't necessarily get hooked on one manufacturer unless your OCD is kicking in. I recommend buy what you can afford. Just be cautious with those online purchases. Love to hear your thoughts on this video. What kind of clamps do you use? Is there one particular style that you prefer over others? Do you only buy parallel clamps or do you only use F-style clamps? Drop in the comments below. I'd love to hear. If you enjoyed this video, maybe give it a thumbs up and share it with friends. And if you haven't already, maybe it's time to hit that subscribe button and the little bell so you get notified each time I put out a new video. As always, don't have a clue what's coming up next, and yes, I am still very limited what I can do in the shop, although I have started making some dust. So for now, have a great day, take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye. This is me just rambling about clamps.